Wilted Flowers. The streets of my neighborhood are lined with gardens. It was one of the things that attracted me to the location in the first place. The flowers bloomed late into the year, and the upkeep was meticulous. The caretakers of these gardens were usually mothers, trying to keep one thing in their lives neat and beautiful while their children were young. I began one when I moved in, and while it wasn't the best in the area, I was proud of the work I had done. The one thing I had going for me was that the children loved it. I have no children of my own, and while the other women on the street try to keep the children out of the gardens, I don't mind them running wild through mine. I remember being young, making bouquets of flowers, playing strange games, and creating intricate rituals with the plants in my mother's backyard. I was happy to provide that joy for the children, and one of the joys of my own day was watching them. During the summer, I felt as though I met every child within a 5-mile radius. I tried my best to remember their names, and when I couldn't, I remembered their faces. As the summer died down and they went back to school, their numbers dwindled, although they would still come by when they could. It was during this time that I first noticed her. I first saw her when she was crouched over my daisies. She was young, somewhere between 5 and 7 years old at a guess, and she ran her fingers over the flowers with meticulous care. I hadn't seen her before, and I knew no new families had moved into the area. I assumed her face must have gotten lost in the crowd of the summer. She had long, dark hair and wore a white dress. Her feet were bare and smudged with dirt. As I watched, she plucked 2 daisies from the ground and stood up. She held them tightly in her fist. She looked into my window, meeting my eye, then ran out of the yard. I saw her more frequently after that first sighting. She came at the same time every day in the afternoon. She would walk slowly through the garden, eyes darting over the different plants, before choosing one and crouching over it. She would study her options and take 2 flowers before running off again. After a few visits, I noticed she always wore the same dress. That worried me. But I knew that some children would refuse to wear anything other than their favorite clothes. I brushed it away. She came during school hours. She was old enough to be in school. This worried me more than the dress, but I told myself she could be homeschooled. 2 weeks passed, and she visited every day except for Saturdays. Saturdays were when the other children would come to play. It was as though she was avoiding them. I wondered if she was bullied, or if she was just shy. It was a Monday afternoon when I first spoke to her. She was sitting next to the violets, scrutinizing them with her typical intensity. She was wearing the same dress, and my concern was growing too strong to ignore. I got a glass of water and opened the door, taking it outside to her. She didn't look up as I approached. "Those are really pretty, aren't they?" I asked her. She nodded slowly, still not looking up. Her feet were brown from the dirt, and her white dress was stained at the hem. "I'm Teresa. What's your name, sweetie?" I said. And she looked up at me this time, with large, dark eyes. "Mary." Her voice was a hoarse whisper. Maybe she'd been sick recently. "It's very nice to meet you, Mary. Are you thirsty?" I held the water out to her. She shook her head and turned back to the flowers. Moving with precision, she plucked two and held them up to her nose. "Do you live around here?" I asked. Mary nodded again. She raised a finger and pointed to the house across the street. I frowned. I didn't know that the Johnsons had a child. I wasn't as close with them as some of my neighbors. But the neighborhood was so child-oriented, I was sure I would have known. Before I could ask another question, she stood up and took off running. I whirled around and saw her disappear into the Johnsons' backyard. I tossed and turned all that night, wondering what the right thing was to do. It was strange that I didn't know about the Johnsons' child, and with the state that Mary was in, I was worried about how she was being treated. I hated to accuse one of my neighbors of neglect or abuse, but if something like that was happening, I knew I had to speak up. The next day was Saturday, and, as usual, Mary didn't show up. I looked for her among the other children, but, as I expected, she was nowhere to be seen. That evening, I walked over to the Johnsons' house. My heart was in my throat, but I was resolved on what I needed to do. Louisa answered the door. She was a sweet woman, with long blonde hair and blue eyes. She didn't look anything like Mary. "Hi, Teresa. What can I do for you?" she asked kindly. "Hi, Louisa. I was just coming over to check in on Mary. She sounded a bit sick last time I saw her, and I wanted to see if there was anything I could do to help." My tone was perfectly polite and cordial. Louisa frowned. "Mary?" She said the name as if she had never heard it before. "Yes, your daughter?" I said. I was confused. Louisa chuckled awkwardly. "We don't have a daughter. Are you feeling all right?" My blood boiled. "What do you mean? There's a little girl who's been coming to my garden. Dark hair, white dress. She said she lived here." "I'm sorry, but I promise you we don't have a daughter." Louisa was sounding more and more uncomfortable by the second, but she seemed like she was telling the truth. "I'm sorry, Louisa. I guess she must belong to someone else. Kids can be strange. I was just worried about her." Louisa forced a smile, and I left as quickly as possible. I glanced back at the house, and I saw a small, pale face peeking over the backyard fence. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. I knew the face I saw was Mary's, but Louisa had been sincere about not having a child. Was Mary hiding in their yard? Was she homeless? Should I tell them? I didn't see Mary the next day, but when I woke up in the morning, there was a bundle of flowers on my door, one of nearly every kind from my garden. Some were fresh, some were wilted. 2 small footprints were next to them on my porch. A chill ran up my spine, and I reached down and took them. A tingle ran through my fingers. I looked across the street. The gate was open. I asked around the rest of the neighborhood. No one else knew Mary. No one else had ever seen her. I left out the part about the Johnson's house. I knew it would make me sound crazy. After a week of waiting, I saw Mary again. She stood motionlessly in front of my lilies. Her head was bent, and the stains on her dress were more prominent than I remembered. I watched her from a window for some time, waiting for her to move. Finally, she took a lily. Only one this time. She looked up. Her dark eyes met mine through the window, and she beckoned me forward. I slowly went out. She began walking and looked over her shoulder to make sure I was following her. Her bare feet patted on the ground, but she made no noise when she walked. She took me to the Johnsons' backyard. They were both at work. She stopped beneath a tree and knelt down. She placed a lily on the ground. There were a number of other flowers there. I knelt next to her. "I live here." Her voice sounded out, raspy and croaking. "In the tree?" I asked softly. In response, her hand tapped the dirt. My blood ran cold. "Down here." She slowly turned her head towards me. Her skin was pallid, and her eyes were sunk deep into their sockets. Her hair was matted with dirt, and the stains on her gown, I realized, were a mixture of dirt and blood. My throat closed, and my hands trembled. Her small hand reached out to touch mine, and I shuddered. "No one visits. I'm lonely," she said. Her hand tightened on mine. "I won't be lonely now." My eyes locked on the wilted flowers beneath the tree. Then Mary was standing behind me, and I felt my head snap sharply to one side. My eyes remained fixed on the flowers as I fell, my mind flashing back to the flowers left at my doorstep. Just as these were an offering at Mary's own grave, her flowers had been a premature offering at mine.